Over the weekend, something strange happened in American politics, not because it was dramatic, but because it was revealing. Donald Trump and Elon Musk, two men who normally orbit power rather than collide with it, openly turned on one another. In the middle of that public fallout, Musk lobbed a claim that detonated far beyond their feud, that Trump appears in the Epstein files, and that this is the real reason those files remain sealed. Whether Musk knows anything concrete is almost beside the point. What matters is timing. Because at the exact moment that accusation went public, Kash Patel was sitting in a recording studio with Joe Rogan, spending 2 hours attempting to reassure the public that Jeffrey Epstein definitively killed himself and that the case, for all practical purposes, is functionally closed. That coincidence alone should make anyone paying attention uneasy. The Epstein story has never been about a single criminal. It has always been about a system, a network, and systems don't disappear just because one node is removed. Yet the message coming from inside official institutions is increasingly clear. There is nothing more to see, nothing more to investigate, and nothing more that can be released without causing harm. That message is not convincing. During the Rogan interview, Patel repeatedly emphasized that the FBI is giving you everything we have. He suggested that if incriminating videos of powerful people existed, the public would have already seen them. He implied that the absence of evidence is evidence of absence, that the lack of visible proof means the proof never existed, that framing collapses under even mild scrutiny. We know, not speculate, not theorize, but know, that Epstein maintained extensive video surveillance in his residences. Multiple witnesses testified to it, victims described it, former employees referenced it. Law enforcement seized boxes of tapes during raids. This was not rumor, it was documented fact. So the question is not whether the tapes existed, the question is where they went. Patel's explanation assumes that evidence flows in one direction, from criminal to investigator to public. But history tells us something very different. Evidence can be intercepted, it can be buried, it can be selectively destroyed, it can be removed from official channels long before it ever reaches someone like Patel. That is the uncomfortable reality at the center of this case. At the same time Patel was downplaying the significance of missing evidence, Pam Bondi, another high-profile political figure, was making a radically different claim. She publicly stated that the FBI is processing tens of thousands of videos involving Epstein and minors. Not rumors, not hypotheticals, videos. Those two statements cannot coexist without contradiction. Either Patel is being truthful and Bondi is exaggerating or misinforming, or Patel is being shown a carefully curated version of reality while the real evidence exists elsewhere. There is no third option that preserves institutional credibility, and that contradiction matters because it goes directly to the issue of trust. Public confidence in federal institutions is at historic lows, and not because of partisan hysteria, but because the pattern keeps repeating. High-level scandals emerge, evidence surfaces, initial outrage builds, then investigations stall, accountability narrows, and the final narrative becomes smaller than the original crime. Epstein fits that pattern too perfectly. Consider the circumstances of Epstein's death. Surveillance cameras outside his cell malfunctioned, guards fell asleep, records went missing, a first alleged suicide attempt produced no usable footage, a second autopsy conducted by a highly respected forensic pathologist concluded that Epstein's injuries were more consistent with strangulation than hanging. These are not internet rumors. They are documented irregularities, many of which Patel admitted he had not personally reviewed. That admission alone should alarm anyone who believes the case has been exhausted. An investigator does not need to believe Epstein was murdered to acknowledge that the official explanation rests on a stack of failures so dense it demands deeper inquiry. Yet instead of reopening those questions, the posture from leadership appears to be resignation, a quiet insistence that whatever happened, happened and cannot be meaningfully revisited. But Epstein was not just a predator. He was a national security vulnerability. The scale of his operation, the caliber of his associates, and the sophistication of his access suggest something far beyond personal depravity. This was a man who moved comfortably among heads of state, intelligence officials, financial elites, and corporate power brokers. He had no clear source of wealth, no transparent business model, and no plausible explanation for the influence he wielded. That combination is not accidental. Blackmail is one of the oldest tools of power, and Epstein's operation bore every hallmark of a classic compromise system, compromising material carefully recorded, meticulously archived, and selectively deployed. the kind of system that does not benefit a lone criminal, but rather those who control the leverage it creates. If Epstein truly worked alone, his operation would have collapsed long before it reached the White House, royal palaces, and intelligence circles. The fact that it didn't tells us something crucial. Someone had an interest in keeping it alive. That interest did not disappear when Epstein died. If the FBI does not possess the most damaging material Epstein collected, then someone else does. And that reality is far more dangerous than any conspiracy theory because it implies ongoing leverage over people who still occupy positions of immense authority. This is why dismissing unanswered questions as conspiratorial is not just lazy, but reckless. National security threats do not stop being threats simply because they are inconvenient to acknowledge. The public is being told to accept closure without transparency, certainty without disclosure, and trust without accountability. That formula has failed too many times to be persuasive now. And this is where the story truly begins, not ends. Because the Epstein network was not built on one man alone. It was sustained by enablers, facilitators, recruiters, financial backers, and intermediaries, many of whom are still alive, still wealthy, and still untouched by serious investigation. If someone genuinely wanted answers, they would not start with press conferences or carefully worded denials. They would start with those people. And that is exactly where this conversation goes next. If the Epstein case were truly over, the trail would be cold, witnesses would be exhausted, co-conspirators would be accounted for, and unanswered questions would be marginal. That is not what we're looking at. What we're looking at instead is a case where the central figure is gone, but nearly everyone who enabled him remains untouched. And that alone tells you this was never about one man. The most obvious place to continue any serious investigation is not missing files or sealed documents, but people, specifically the people who made Epstein's operation function day to day. Large criminal enterprises do not run on secrecy alone. They run on logistics, scheduling, recruitment, transportation, financial routing, silence enforcement. None of that happens without helpers. We already know the most famous name, Ghislaine Maxwell. She was convicted not for committing every act herself, but for facilitating them, for recruiting, for grooming, for managing access. Her conviction establishes something critical. Legal precedent. If what Maxwell did was criminal, then anyone who performed the same role is legally exposed, and there were several. Sarah Kellen is one of them. She was not a peripheral employee. She was Epstein's scheduler, organizer, and operational manager. Victims identified her repeatedly. She coordinated travel, she handled appointments, she knew who was coming, when they were coming, and why they were coming. This is not speculation. It was part of the documented record. Yet today, she is free, wealthy, living openly, untouched. That fact alone dismantles the idea that the justice system exhausted its options. Then there's Leslie Groff, Epstein's personal assistant for nearly 2 decades. She was named as a potential co-conspirator in the 2008 plea deal. She arranged logistics, travel, housing, and daily operations. If anyone had a comprehensive view of Epstein's network, it would be someone who managed his calendar and communications for 20 years. She, too, remains uncharged. These are not fringe figures. These are central nodes. And the fact that they have not been compelled to testify under threat of prosecution raises an uncomfortable question. Why not? If the answer is lack of evidence, then the Maxwell conviction makes no sense. If the answer is prosecutorial discretion, then discretion is being applied selectively. And if the answer is political pressure, then we are no longer talking about a criminal investigation, we are talking about containment. And that brings us to the financial backbone of the operation. Jeffrey Epstein did not generate his wealth through any transparent means. His closest financial relationship was with Leslie Wexner, the billionaire founder of L Brands. Epstein was granted power of attorney over Wexner's finances, an almost unheard of level of control. Through that authority, Epstein acquired properties, aircraft, and access that made his operation possible. Wexner later claimed he was unaware of Epstein's crimes and portrayed himself as a victim of theft. That explanation strains credibility. Power of attorney does not function in a vacuum. It requires trust, oversight, and ongoing engagement. More importantly, Wexner was not merely a source of money. His businesses, particularly in fashion and modeling, provided a pipeline of access to young people, international travel, and plausible cover stories. That ecosystem did not appear accidentally. Even after Epstein's conviction in 2008, relationships persisted, invitations continued, social ties remained intact. That is not how genuine ignorance behaves after exposure. Then there is the political layer. Bill Clinton's documented association with Epstein is not conjecture. Epstein visited the White House multiple times. Flight logs show Clinton traveling with Epstein after leaving office. One of the gatekeepers who facilitated Epstein's White House access later died under circumstances that remain deeply unusual. Again, the issue is not proving guilt through association. The issue is that these associations were never fully examined under oath with subpoena power across jurisdictions. Prince Andrew's case demonstrates what happens when evidence becomes too visible to ignore. A single photograph, undeniable, contextual, and human, forced consequences. Titles were stripped. Settlements were reached. Silence followed. But Prince Andrew was not unique. He was simply the one caught in an image that could not be spun away. Many others were not. Leon Black paid Epstein extraordinary sums for financial advice. Larry Summers met with Epstein repeatedly after his conviction. Ehud Barak visited Epstein dozens of times, sometimes disguising his identity. Glenn Dubin and his wife were deeply intertwined socially and financially with Epstein, even after his crimes were public. These are not marginal figures. These are pillars of political, financial, and international influence, yet none of them have faced comprehensive questioning by a grand jury on the full scope of Epstein's activities. Why? The usual explanation is insufficient evidence, but evidence does not generate itself. It is gathered by asking questions, compelling testimony, and following money. When that process stops prematurely, absence of evidence becomes a self-fulfilling outcome. This is why framing the Epstein case as solved is misleading. What has happened is not resolution, but truncation. And truncation serves someone. Which brings us to the most dangerous implication of all, intelligence involvement. Multiple officials over the years suggested that Epstein was connected to intelligence and should be left alone. That claim surfaced during the original Florida prosecution. It was never formally investigated, but it was never convincingly denied either. If Epstein functioned as an intelligence asset, whether for a foreign service, a domestic agency, or a hybrid network, then his protection, his lenient treatment, and the disappearance of critical evidence begin to make sense. Blackmail is intelligence currency. If compromising material still exists, and logic suggests it does, then leverage still exists. And leverage over political, corporate, and media elites is not a historical problem. It is a present-day risk. That is why the most unsettling possibility is not that Epstein killed himself or was murdered. It is that his operation was never dismantled, merely reorganized. Some have floated the idea that Epstein may have been quietly removed from public view to prevent his assassination while preserving his utility as a witness. That theory sounds extreme, but it emerges not from fantasy, but from the sheer implausibility of the official narrative when weighed against the facts. To be clear, certainty is impossible without transparency, but skepticism is rational when every institutional incentive points toward silence. The shift in tone from figures who once demanded accountability to figures now urging closure is what fuels public distrust. It is not conspiracy culture. It is pattern recognition. At some point, the story that demands belief in endless coincidences becomes less believable than the story that assumes coordination. And that is where we are now, is where we are. The Epstein case is not a closed chapter in American history. It is an unresolved exposure of how power protects itself through delay, diffusion, and deliberate exhaustion of public attention. If the truth ever emerges, it will not come from press releases. It will come from pressure, legal, public, and relentless, applied to the living people who still hold the missing pieces. Until then, the question is not whether Jeffrey Epstein killed himself. The real question is whether anyone in power truly wants the full answer.